welcome back to Veil of Night. I'm your host. Tonight, we head to the rugged, isolated coast of Maine. USA lighthouses are more than just navigational aids. They are sentinels of the sea, often standing in defiant solitude against the elements. But in that profound isolation, something primal, something ancient, sometimes stirs, and in that stirring, the line between reality and the spectral can blur, terrifyingly. T's story comes from Marcus, a young man who, back in 2018, sought refuge from the chaos of city life. He volunteered for a summer as a caretaker at a deactivated lighthouse, hoping for peace and quiet. What he found instead was a chilling presence, a persistent grief, and a nightmare he's still trying to outrun. The lighthouse stood like a weathered giant on a jagged piece of rock, miles away from the nearest town, accessible only by a long, winding coastal path that disappeared with the high tide. My only constant companion was the relentless roar of the Atlantic Ocean, crashing against the rocks below. For the first week, it was exactly what I'd imagined. Serene, solitary, and breathtakingly beautiful. I spent my days reading, sketching, and exploring the tide pools. But then, the wet footprints started appearing. It began subtly. I would wake up in the morning, make my way down the spiral iron stairs from my sleeping quarters in the tower's base, and find them. A distinct trail of wet footprints. They weren't from me. They always started near the heavy wooden front door, which I meticulously locked every night, and led all the way up the curving staircase to the lantern room at the very top of the tower. The water was definitely seawater, salty, cold, and leaving faint, dark stains on the old oak floorboards. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had forgotten to lock the door once or twice. Maybe the old lighthouse was just incredibly damp, and condensation was creating these marks. But the pattern was too consistent. Always ascending, never descending, and always leading to the lantern room, which was bare and locked from the inside. One night, about 3 weeks into my stay, a massive storm rolled in. The kind of storm where the wind howls like a banshee and the rain hits the glass like pebbles. I was down in the kitchen, trying to read by the flickering light of a battery lamp, when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound at the window. He shined my flashlight outside, but the light only reflected off the sheets of rain. Nothing was there. I turned back to my book, trying to convince myself it was just branches scraping. The old radio on the counter, which wasn't even plugged into an outlet, crackled to life. A woman's voice, distorted and wet, came through the static. It was faint, barely audible over the storm, but clear enough to send a shiver down my spine. "Is the light still burning, Thomas?" it whispered, then dissolved back into static. My heart hammered in my chest. Thomas. My name isn't Thomas. And how was that radio even on? A primal fear took hold. I grabbed my flashlight in. Against every sane instinct, I ran up the spiral stairs. I needed to check the lantern room. I needed to see if it was up there. The wet footprints, the radio, it all led to that one place. As I burst through the final hatch into the lantern room, the storm outside seemed to intensify. The wind shrieked, and rain lashed against the thick glass of the lantern. And then I saw her. A woman. She was standing on the narrow outside gallery, exposed to the full fury of the storm. Her body pressed against the railings, staring in through the glass. Airback to me, she wore a long, tattered black dress that clung to her emaciated frame. Her hair was matted with seaweed, draped over her shoulders, and her skin looked like it had been underwater for a very, very long time. It was a pale, sickly, blue-gray. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking out at the tumultuous horizon, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the crashing waves, waiting for a ship that was never coming. I stood there, frozen, unable to move, barely daring to breathe. Then, slowly, deliberately, she began to turn her head. Her movements were stiff, like a mannequin's. When her face finally came into full view, I saw her eyes. They weren't eyes at all, just empty, white pearls, devoid of pupil or iris, reflecting the stormy gray sky. She pressed her blue, bloated hand against the cold glass, a hand that looked like it had been eroded by the sea itself, and let out a silent scream, a horrifying gush of seawater from her mouth that left a trail on the glass. I don't remember running down the stairs. I don't remember unlocking the front door. All I know is that I was out of that lighthouse, scrambling down the rocky path, not caring about the high tide or the storm. I ran until I collapsed on the muddy road leading back to civilization. You never went back to that lighthouse, not even to collect my belongings. But the experience gnawed at me. I needed to know, so I visited the local historical society, deep in a dusty archive, and I found her story. In 1890, this lighthouse was tended by a devoted keeper named Thomas and his wife, Sarah. A fierce hurricane struck the coast, one of the worst recorded. Thomas was out at sea, caught in the storm. From that very lantern room gallery, Sarah watched, helpless, as her husband's ship battled the monstrous waves. She saw it capsize, just yards from the shore. She saw him vanish into the churning abyss. Sarah refused to believe he was gone. For days, she remained in that lantern room, refusing food, convinced that Thomas would swim back to her. She would light the lamp every night, even when the lighthouse was officially shut down due to the storm damage, hoping her light would guide him home. Her grief consumed her. On the fifth night, during another smaller storm, she was found gone from the lighthouse. The townsfolk believed she had finally succumbed to her despair and jumped into the tumultuous sea to join her beloved Thomas. And to this day, whenever a great storm hits that coast, people say the light in that abandoned tower sometimes flickers on, and the spirit of Sarah returns to her lonely vigil, still walking those spiral stairs, still watching from the gallery, still waiting for Thomas to come home. The sea is a powerful force, and so is love, or perhaps grief. Marcus now avoids anything that smells of salt and old wood. And honestly, after hearing Sarah's story, who can blame him? Her devotion, her eternal weight, is both tragic and utterly terrifying. Have you ever encountered a spirit trapped by an unfulfilled promise or an unending grief? An entity bound to a place by something more powerful than death itself? Send your stories to veilofnight13@gmail.com. Until next time, keep the lights on and stay safe.